Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. That way, you'll always stay connected to our stories and never miss the next adventure. Joanna had specifically requested Corridor 12 on Nexus Orbital Prime for one reason, and one reason only: silence. After 8 years hauling cargo on ships where the engine deck roared like a mechanical thunderstorm 24 hours a day, where hull plating creaked and groaned through every jump, where her bunkmates snored in a symphony that could wake the dead, she'd earned some peace. Corridor 12 was known throughout the station as the retirement hall, though Joanna was only 36 and had no intention of retiring anytime soon. It was just quiet, peaceful, the kind of place where you could hear yourself think, where the most excitement came from Mrs. Palangi's cat, occasionally yowling at the air filtration vents. Perfect. She'd been living there for 3 months, enjoying every silent, blissful moment, when station housing sent out the notification: new residents arriving in Unit 12D, directly across from her own 12C. Joanna remembered reading the notice with mild interest. The Dramathi. She'd heard of them, of course. Everyone had. Apex predators from a high-gravity world called Dramath Prime, where the food chain had exactly one species at the top, and that species had clawed its way there with 6 limbs, bioluminescent markings that could hypnotize prey, and enough bite force to crack Matherian crystal. They'd joined the galactic community only 2 generations ago, and they still had that reputation. Dangerous, disciplined, not particularly social. But hey, Joanna figured, they were diplomats, probably very professional, very quiet. Maybe they'd nod politely in the hallway, and otherwise keep to themselves. She was, as it turned out, catastrophically wrong. The Dramathi family arrived on a Monday morning, and Joanna happened to be heading out for her shift when the moving containers started floating down the corridor. She stopped, coffee in hand, and watched as the door to 12D slid open. The first thing she noticed was the size. Nalreth ducked through the doorway, and he had to duck significantly. He stood easily 8 feet tall when fully upright, his body a sleek mixture of panther-like grace and wolf-like power, covered in deep violet fur that shimmered with lighter purple markings. His 6 limbs, 4 for walking and 2 that served as incredibly dexterous manipulators, moved with the kind of precision that made Joanna's primate brain sit up and pay attention. Those bioluminescent markings everyone talked about? They weren't just pretty. They pulsed gently along his spine and shoulders, creating patterns that Joanna found oddly mesmerizing. His partner, Dimara, followed close behind. She was slightly smaller, maybe only a little past the 6-foot mark, with darker fur, nearly black with deep crimson markings that flickered like embers. Where Nalreth moved with deliberate care, Dimara flowed, every motion smooth as water. And then came the cubs. 3 of them, tumbling out of the doorway in a cascade of oversized paws, tangled limbs, and excited chirping sounds that definitely didn't match the dangerous apex predator reputation. They were small, maybe 3 feet tall, their fur still carrying that fuzzy, not quite adult texture. Their markings glowed brighter than their parents', cycling through colors rapidly: blue, green, gold, pink. One of them, the smallest with bright blue markings, immediately tried to climb the wall. He made it about 4 feet before his claws lost purchase on the metal plating, and he tumbled backward, landing in a heap that would have been concerning if he hadn't immediately popped back up and tried again. "Pip!" Dimara's voice was surprisingly melodic, though firm. "We discussed this. Walls are not for climbing on the station." "But they're right there," Pip protested. his translator rendering his chittering growls into standard galactic with a child's petulant tone. "What else are they for?" "Walking beside, not ascending," Nalreth rumbled, his voice deeper, carrying that bass note that Joanna could feel in her chest. "Come, help with the containers." The other two cubs, one with green markings and one with gold, were investigating the corridor with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for scientists cataloging new worlds. The green one, moving with careful, calculated steps, was examining the light fixtures. The gold one, radiating barely contained energy, was zooming back and forth between the family and the far end of the hallway, apparently burning off excess excitement. Joanna realized she'd been standing there staring for a solid 30 seconds. She cleared her throat. Nalreth's head swiveled toward her with predatory speed, and Joanna felt that ancient prey species instinct fire in her brain. Those eyes, 4 of them arranged in 2 pairs, locked onto her with the kind of focus that evolution had designed to make smaller creatures freeze. Then he blinked, and the intensity softened. "Apologies. You are our neighbor?" Yeah. Joanna, Unit 12C. She raised her coffee mug in what she hoped was a friendly gesture. "Welcome to the corridor. I am Nalreth. This is my partner, Dimara, and our cubs, Pip, Rook, and Tally." He gestured with one of his upper manipulator limbs to each cub in turn. Pip, the wall climber, waved enthusiastically, nearly smacking his brother in the face. Rook, the gold one still zooming, skidded to a halt long enough to give Joanna a curious look, head tilted at an angle that shouldn't have been anatomically possible. Tally, the green one, the careful observer, simply stared at Joanna with those 4 eyes, and Joanna had the distinct impression she was being catalogued and filed away for future reference. Joanna searched for a diplomatic word. Energetic. "They are young," Dimara said, and there was something in her tone. Weariness, maybe. Stress. And adjusting. This is their first time off Dramath Prime. "Everything is different," Pip announced, abandoning the wall to bounce over to his mother. "The gravity is wrong. Things fall weird, and it smells like metal and ozone, and something else I can't identify yet." "That would be the recycled air," Joanna offered. "You get used to it." "Will we?" Tally asked, and the question sounded far too philosophical for a kid who couldn't have been more than 6 or 8 in human equivalent years. Nalreth and Dimara exchanged a look, one of those parental communications that transcended species. Joanna recognized it instantly. The "we're not sure if we made the right choice moving here" look. "You will," Joanna said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "Kids adapt faster than adults. Give it a few weeks." "We appreciate the encouragement," Nalreth said formally, inclining his head in what Joanna assumed was a gesture of respect. "We will try to keep noise to a minimum. The cubs are on a strict schedule. Lessons in the morning, physical training in the afternoon, study period in the evening. Free time is earned through completed tasks and proper behavior." Joanna blinked. That sounded intense. But who was she to judge alien parenting techniques? "Sure, no problem. And, if you need anything, just knock. I work station maintenance, so I know where everything is." "Thank you," Dimara said, herding the cubs back toward their door. "Come, the containers will not unpack themselves, and you each have assignments." The cubs groaned in unison, a sound that was apparently universal across species, and trudged back inside. Joanna watched them go, then headed off to her shift, thinking that maybe having neighbors with kids wouldn't be so bad. They seemed nice, disciplined even. Probably wouldn't even notice them most of the time. 3 days later, she realized how wrong she was. She'd pulled a double shift, covering for a co-worker who'd called in sick, and by the time she trudged back to Corridor 12, she was dead on her feet. All she wanted was to fall face first into her bunk and sleep for approximately 16 hours. She was halfway down the corridor when she saw it. A ball. Just sitting there, right in the middle of the hallway floor. It was bright orange, about the size of a grapefruit, made of that rubbery synthetic material that station-supplied toys were usually constructed from. Probably lost by someone's kid from one of the other family units on the deck. Joanna bent down and picked it up, intending to drop it off at the station's lost and found terminal on her way to unconsciousness. The moment her fingers closed around it, she heard the sound. Skrrt. Claws on metal decking. Multiple sets, coming to a very sudden stop. Joanna looked up. At the far end of the corridor, just outside Unit 12D, 3 small Dromathi cubs were frozen in perfect hunting crouches. 6 eyes per cub, 18 total, all locked onto the orange sphere in her hand, with the kind of focus usually reserved for life-or-death situations. Their bioluminescent markings had gone completely still, not flickering, just glowing with steady intensity. Blue, green, gold. Their tails, which Joanna hadn't really noticed before, were stretched out behind them for balance. Their claws, retracted when they'd been playing before, were now fully extended, digging tiny grooves into the deck plating. Joanna knew that look. She'd seen it on cats, on dogs, on every predator species she'd ever encountered, biological or mechanical. That was the hunting stare, and she was holding their prey. "Ah," Joanna said intelligently. "Hi?" Pip's ears twitched. Rook's tail swayed once, twice. Tally's muscles bunched. Joanna, tired and perhaps not thinking clearly, did what any human who'd grown up with pets would do. She bounced the ball. Once, just once, against the corridor floor. The orange sphere hit the deck with a satisfying thump and rebounded into her hand. The cubs exploded into motion. It wasn't coordinated. It wasn't graceful. It was pure, unfiltered, instinct-driven chaos. Pip launched himself forward and immediately discovered that station gravity was, indeed, different from homeworld gravity. He overshot, his trajectory carrying him past Joanna entirely, and he slammed into the wall with a thud that probably would have hurt if he'd been human. Instead, he just shook himself and spun around, claws scrabbling for purchase. Rook came in low and fast, moving like a gold-marked missile, but he was going too fast to stop. He tried to adjust mid-stride, his 6 limbs scrambling in different directions, and ended up spinning out in a 360 that would have been impressive if it hadn't ended with him sliding directly into Tally. Tally, who'd been taking the careful, measured approach, stalking forward with tactical precision, got absolutely blindsided by her brother. They went down in a tangle of limbs and tails, growling and chirping in what sounded like sibling accusations. Joanna stood there, ball still in hand, watching apex predator cubs make absolute fools of themselves. And then Pip recovered, spotted the ball again, and charged. This time, Joanna's reflexes kicked in. She tossed the ball gently, underhand, about halfway down the corridor. What followed was, quite possibly, the most adorable display of predatory inefficiency she'd ever witnessed. All 3 cubs converged on the rolling sphere. Pip got there first, pinning it with both upper manipulator limbs in a move that would have been impressive if Rook hadn't immediately tackle-pounced him from behind. The ball squirted free, rolling directly toward Tally, who'd positioned herself perfectly to intercept. Tally pounced, claws extended, and missed. The ball bounced off her paw and shot back in the other direction. The cubs gave chase. their bioluminescent markings flashing rapidly through colors that Joanna was fairly certain indicated extreme excitement. The sounds they were making, those chirp-growl combinations, had gone up several octaves, into what could only be described as squealing. They were having the time of their lives. And they were loud. Not just loud, thunderous. 18 paws hitting metal, decking at full sprint, created a sound like a percussion ensemble having a seizure. The growls and chirps echoed off the corridor walls. At one point, Pip managed to get the ball and made a break for it, and his siblings' pursuit sounded like a small stampede. Joanna watched, fascinated despite her exhaustion, as the cubs played. Played. Not trained, not studied, not engaged in carefully supervised activities. Just played. Rook got the ball, and, in a move that seemed to surprise even him, tossed it in the air with his upper limbs and tried to catch it. He failed spectacularly, the ball bouncing off his snout, but his delighted chirping suggested he didn't care at all. Tally demonstrated that she was the strategist, herding the ball toward corners where she could trap it, except her brothers had figured out her tactic and kept intercepting. Pip discovered that he could make the ball ricochet off the walls at unexpected angles, creating chaos that all three cubs seemed to find hilarious. They played for maybe 5 minutes, though it felt longer, and Joanna found herself grinning despite her tiredness. There was something deeply, fundamentally joyful about watching children of any species just be kids. And then a door opened. Unit 12D's door slid open with a soft hiss, and Nelreth stepped into the corridor. The cubs froze instantly, the ball rolling to a gentle stop against Tally's paw. Joanna expected anger or embarrassment. The Dramathai had a reputation for being strict, disciplined. They'd told her themselves. The cubs were on schedules, with free time earned through proper behavior. But Nalreth didn't look angry. He looked sad. He stood there in the doorway, all 8 feet of apex predator, and watched his children with an expression that transcended species barriers. Joanna recognized it because she'd seen it on her own father's face once, years ago, when he'd told her they couldn't afford the art academy she'd been accepted to. It was the look of someone who wanted something desperately but couldn't allow themselves to have it. Damara appeared behind him, resting one paw on her partner's shoulder. She was looking at the cubs, too, and her markings were flickering in a pattern Joanna couldn't interpret, but somehow understood, meant something complicated. Pip, Rook, Tally. Nalreth's voice was gentle but firm. Return inside. Study period is not complete. The cubs' markings dimmed immediately, their earlier brightness fading to muted colors. They moved toward the door with the heaviness of children being called away from something wonderful. Joanna made a decision, probably a stupid decision, but she'd pulled a double shift, and her brain-to-mouth filter was running on fumes. Can they keep it? Nalreth's head swiveled toward her, those 4 eyes focusing with that predatory intensity again. What? The ball? Can they keep it? Joanna held up the orange sphere. I was just going to take it to Lost and Found anyway. If nobody claims it, seems like they're enjoying it. Silence stretched in the corridor. The cubs had frozen again, hope radiating from every fuzzy limb. Dimara and Nalreth were having one of those silent conversations again, but this one was clearly more intense. Their markings were pulsing in patterns that seemed like communication, rapid exchanges that Joanna couldn't begin to understand. Finally, Nalreth spoke, his voice carefully controlled. On Dramath Prime, such toys are considered frivolous, distracting. Cubs learn through structure, discipline, purpose-driven activity. Play without purpose weakens focus. Okay, Joanna said slowly, but you're not on Dramath Prime anymore. Dimara's markings flared brighter for just a moment. She looked at Joanna with all four eyes, and when she spoke, her voice was quieter than before. They have been struggling with the adjustment. New gravity, new air, new everything. They complete their lessons, but they are subdued, not themselves. They looked pretty themselves just now, Joanna pointed out. Yes, Nalreth said, and that single word carried a weight of admission. They did. Another pause. The cubs were vibrating with anticipation, their tails twitching. Then Nalreth gave a slow, deliberate nod. They may keep the ball, but, he raised a manipulator limb as the cubs started to celebrate, there will be rules, designated times, acceptable noise levels, and if lessons suffer, the privilege is revoked. Yes, Father, 3 voices chorused, though the excitement was barely contained beneath the words. Thank you, Dimara said to Joanna, and the gratitude in her voice was genuine. You are kind to offer. Joanna handed the ball to Tally, who accepted it with reverent care, as if it were made of spun gold rather than synthetic rubber. No problem. Welcome to the neighborhood. She headed to her own unit, palmed the door lock, and stepped inside. As the door slid shut behind her, she heard the cubs erupt into excited chatter, their voices rising in pitch as they discussed their new treasure. Joanna smiled, kicked off her boots, and collapsed onto her bunk. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that maybe the corridor wouldn't be quite as quiet anymore. She had no idea how right she was. The next evening, Joanna learned what 18 paws sounded like at full sprint. She'd just gotten home from her shift, was reaching for her door panel, when the thunder started. Thud! 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 It wasn't just loud. It was seismic, the kind of sound that made the deck plating vibrate, that triggered some ancient human instinct screaming, large animals approaching at speed, seek shelter immediately. Joanna spun around just in time to see 3 Dramathi cubs come tearing around the corner, the orange ball bouncing between them in a complex game that seemed to involve interception, misdirection, and absolutely no regard for momentum control. Pip had the ball. Rook was in pursuit, closing fast. Tally was flanking, trying to cut off Pip's escape route. Pip juked left, his 6 limbs scrabbling for purchase on the smooth deck. He overcompensated, slid sideways, and the ball shot free, bouncing directly toward Joanna. 3 pairs of eyes, 12 total, locked onto her. Joanna grinned. She couldn't help it. She kicked the ball gently back down the corridor. The cubs erupted into fresh chaos, their chirp growls reaching new pitches of excitement. Rook got there first, managed to scoop the ball up with his upper limbs, and immediately got tackled by both siblings. They rolled past Joanna in a tumbling mass of fur and limbs and glowing markings, growling and laughing, yes, definitely laughing, in that universal language of playing children. They are punctual, if nothing else. Joanna turned to find Nalreth standing in his doorway, watching the chaos with that same expression from yesterday. Sadness mixed with something else now. Relief, maybe, or permission. Study period just ended? Joanna guessed. 14 minutes ago. They completed their assignments in record time today. His markings flickered in what might have been amusement. Motivation is a powerful tool. They're good kids, Joanna said, watching Tally execute a perfect intercept that would have made a military tactician proud. They are loud kids, came a new voice. Joanna looked down the corridor to see Mrs. Palangi, the elderly Nixelli from Unit 12G, standing in her doorway. The bird-like alien's feathers were ruffled, her crest raised in what was definitely an annoyed posture. The noise travels, Mrs. Palangi continued. her translator giving her voice a clipped, precise quality. My afternoon meditation was interrupted. Twice. Nalreth's posture shifted immediately, becoming more rigid, more formal. My apologies. I will ensure the cubs remain quieter. Oh, don't bother on my account, another voice called out. Mateo, from Unit 12A, was leaning against his doorframe, grinning. The elderly human had been on the station longer than anyone else in the corridor. Reminds me of when my grandkids visit. Makes the place feel alive. His wife, Dolores, appeared beside him. It's nice. Better than listening to Mrs. Palangi's meditation gongs at 0500. Those gongs are traditional, Mrs. Palangi huffed. Those gongs are loud, Mateo countered cheerfully. A door further down opened, and Yorvith, the Metherian crystal being from 12F, emerged. His form sparkled in the corridor lighting, refracting into rainbow patterns. I find the scheduled nature of the activity useful. The cubs play at the same time each evening. I have adjusted my own schedule accordingly. It is predictable. Predictable is acceptable. See? Joanna said to Nalreth. Mixed reviews. Before anyone could respond, Pip came barreling down the corridor at full speed, the ball clutched to his chest, his siblings in hot pursuit. He was heading straight for the wall at the end of the hallway, showing no signs of slowing down. Pip! Dimara's voice rang out from inside the unit. Physics, remember? Momentum plus mass equals... Pip hit the wall. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to bounce backward, land on his rear, and sit there looking mildly stunned. The ball rolled free. Rook and Tally pounced on it simultaneously, colliding mid-air in a tangle that had everyone in the corridor wincing. They hit the deck, rolled twice, and came up fighting over the ball, their growls reaching levels that probably violated multiple noise ordinances. Tally emerged victorious, the ball firmly in her grasp, and immediately took off running in the opposite direction. She's going to be trouble when she grows up, Dolores observed, with the wisdom of someone who'd raised 4 children of her own. She already is, Nalreth said, but there was pride in his voice now, not resignation. Joanna watched the cubs play, watched the neighbors watch the cubs, and realized something was shifting in Corridor 12. The quiet retirement hall was becoming something else, something louder, messier, more alive. Mrs. Palangi retreated into her unit, muttering about filing a complaint with station administration. Mateo and Dolores settled in to watch the show, commentary and all. Yorvith's crystalline form pulsed with what might have been contentment, his meditation apparently unbothered by the chaos. And Joanna found herself pulling her door closed instead of going inside, leaning against the wall, watching 3 alien predator cubs discover the simple joy of a rubber ball and an empty corridor. Same time tomorrow? She asked Nalreth. The big Dramathi looked at her, his 4 eyes reflecting the flickering lights of his playing children. Same time tomorrow, he agreed. The thunder of pause continued, echoing through Corridor 12, announcing to the entire residential deck that quiet hours were officially over. And most of the neighbors didn't seem to mind at all. By the end of the first week, Joanna had learned to time her arrivals. If she got home at 1800 hours, right when study period ended, she'd be greeted by 3 Dramathi cubs who'd apparently decided she was some kind of pack leader. The moment her boots hit the corridor, they'd come streaming out of Unit 12D, chirping excitedly, eyes locked on her hands to see if she'd brought the ball. She usually had. The original orange sphere had been joined by 2 more, 1 blue and 1 green, because watching 3 predator cubs fight over a single ball had taught her that sharing was apparently not an instinct evolution had prioritized. "Joanna," Pip would announce, as if she might be someone else. "Did you bring them?" "Would I forget?" She'd produce the balls from her maintenance pack, and the cubs would lose their minds. What started as simple chase and catch evolved rapidly. Dramathi cubs, it turned out, learned terrifyingly fast. Rook discovered that he could bounce the ball off the walls at angles that confused his siblings. Within 2 days, he'd mapped out every surface in the corridor, calculating ricochets that would have impressed a physics teacher. Tally figured out that the ventilation grates created different sounds depending on where the ball hit them. She started using audio cues to track the ball's position even when she couldn't see it, her ears swiveling with predatory precision. Pip, the strategic one, learned to fake out his siblings. He'd pretend to throw in one direction, then pivot and throw the opposite way. His success rate was about 30%, but when it worked, his triumphant chirping could be heard 3 corridors away. Joanna introduced new games, Keep Away, where she and the cubs formed teams. Wall Ball, which involved bouncing spheres off specific targets she'd marked with tape. Something vaguely resembling soccer, though the rules evolved every 5 minutes based on who was winning. The cubs taught her their games too. Pack Hunt, where all 3 worked together to corner the ball, then had to deliver it to a designated den without the human intercepting. Ambush, which was basically hide-and-seek, except the seeker was hunting a ball instead of other players. Stalking Practice, where they had to move silently, which none of them were particularly good at yet. Joanna was terrible at their games. Her primate reflexes couldn't match predator instincts, her 2 eyes couldn't track movement like their 12, and her single-limb throws were predictable compared to their 6-limbed chaos. But they seemed to love that she tried. "You move funny," Rook informed her one evening, watching her attempt to intercept a ball. "All your weight goes forward. We can predict it." "You're slow," Tally added, not unkindly, just stating facts. "But you throw straight. That's useful." "And you're tall," Pip said, which Joanna found hilarious considering Nalreth towered over her. "You can reach places we can't." They were analyzing her the way they'd analyze any pack member, figuring out her strengths and weaknesses, adapting their play style to include her limitations. It was, Joanna realized, exactly what they'd need to do in a multi-species station. Learn to work with people who moved differently, thought differently, had different capabilities. The hallway games expanded beyond just the Dramathi cubs. Quellen, a young Mothlian from Unit 12J, started hovering near the corridor during play sessions. The insectoid child was small, barely 2 feet tall, with iridescent wings that caught the light beautifully. She was shy at first, just watching from a distance. Tally noticed her first. The green-marked cub approached slowly, the ball held in her upper limbs. "Do you want to play?" Tally asked, her translator rendering the question in soft, careful tones. Quellen's wings buzzed nervously. "I cannot run like you. My legs are not strong." "But you can fly," Pip pointed out, zooming over. "Can you catch from above?" Quellen's multifaceted eyes widened. Yes?" "Then you play from above. We play from below," Rook announced, as if this solved everything. "New game. You try to catch the ball before it touches the ground. We try to catch it before you do." Quellen hesitated for maybe 3 seconds before her wings blurred into motion, lifting her toward the ceiling. The game that followed was absolute chaos. The cubs threw the ball higher than before, trying to make it impossible for Quellen to intercept. Quellen dove and swooped with aerial grace that made Joanna think of old Earth videos of swallows. Nobody won, everyone laughed, and by the end, Quellen was chirping excitedly in her own language, her translator struggling to keep up. A week later, Glimmer joined. The young Parndi arrived in his mobility tank, a water-filled transparent sphere that rolled on gyroscopic mechanisms allowing aquatic species to navigate station environments. He'd been watching from the end of the corridor for days, his tentacles pressed against the inside of his tank. "Can someone who lives in water play ball?" he asked Joanna one evening, his voice bubbling through his tank's translator. "Only one way to find out," Joanna replied. Glimmer's tank had manipulator arms, delicate things designed for fine motor control, not athletics. But the Cubs adapted immediately, creating new rules. If the ball hit Glimmer's tank and he caught it with his arms, his team scored double points. If it rolled under his tank, whoever retrieved it had to spin in a circle before throwing. The rules made no sense. Nobody cared. Mrs. Palangi filed 3 noise complaints in 2 weeks. Mateo and Dolores started taking evening walks specifically to watch the games, providing running commentary that had everyone laughing. Yorvith adjusted his meditation schedule to coincide with playtime, claiming the predictable chaos helped him achieve deeper focus. Other residents started emerging from their units, drawn by the sound of children from 4 different species, learning that joy was a universal language. Corridor 12, the quiet retirement hall, was transforming into something nobody had planned, but everyone was creating together. And Joanna, standing in the middle of the chaos with balls bouncing in 3 directions and children of 4 species laughing in 5 different languages, thought this might be the best assignment she'd ever had. Then everything almost fell apart. The message arrived on a quiet morning, 3 weeks after the hallway games had become Corridor 12's new normal. Joanna was halfway through her coffee when she heard it. A sound she'd never heard from the Dramathy unit before. Silence. Complete, absolute silence. No morning lessons being recited. No Cubs arguing about who got to practice calculations first. No Damara's melodic voice reviewing the day's schedule. Just silence. Joanna set down her coffee and stepped into the corridor. The door to Unit 12D was closed, but she could see shadows moving inside through the frosted panel. Slow shadows. Heavy ones. She was about to knock when the door slid open. Nalreth stood there, and Joanna had never seen him look like this. His markings were flickering erratically, his posture rigid in a way that screamed tension. "Is everything okay?" Joanna asked. "We received communication from Dramath Prime, from the Apex Academy." His voice was carefully controlled, each word precisely measured. "The Cubs application was reviewed." "That's great. When do they—" It was rejected. Joanna stopped. "What?" Damara appeared behind her partner, one paw resting on his shoulder. Her markings were dim, barely glowing. The review board noted that the Cubs' recent behavioral assessments show concerning trends. They are, and I quote, "losing their edge, becoming too soft for proper Dramathy education." "That's insane," Joanna said immediately. "Have they seen how fast Pip can calculate trajectory angles now? Or how Tally uses environmental sounds for tracking? Or how Rook maps spatial relationships?" "Those are not traditional Dramathy skills," Nalreth said quietly. "The board believes we have allowed them to deviate from proper development protocols. They suggest we return home, resume traditional training immediately, before the damage becomes permanent." "Damage?" Joanna felt anger rising in her chest. "They're not damaged. They're adapting, learning, growing. They are playing," Damara said, and her voice cracked slightly. "On Dramath Prime, that is enough to disqualify them from advanced education, from proper placement in society, from the future we hoped they would have." From inside the unit, Joanna could hear the Cubs. They weren't making their usual morning noises. They were whispering, their voices barely audible, and their bioluminescent markings, visible through the doorway, were the dimmest she'd ever seen them. Joanna thought about the past 3 weeks. She'd watched Pip go from a wall-climbing chaos agent to a strategic thinker who could predict movement patterns 5 steps ahead. She'd seen Rook transform his boundless energy into calculated spatial analysis that would have impressed any engineer. She'd witnessed Tally develop multisensory tracking abilities that combined instinct with innovation in ways that felt revolutionary. And more than that, she'd watched 3 terrified cubs who'd barely spoken their first week on the station become confident, joyful children who greeted every neighbor by name and had turned a quiet corridor into a community. The review board hadn't seen any of that. They'd seen data points and behavioral metrics filtered through tradition and fear of change. "What are you going to do?" Joanna asked. Nalreth and Dimara looked at each other, that silent communication passing between them again. When Nalreth spoke, his voice was heavy with resignation. "We are considering options. The Academy on Dramath Prime is not the only path, but it is the best path, the most respected. Without it..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Behind them, Joanna could see Pip sitting on the floor, the orange ball held loosely in his upper limbs. He wasn't bouncing it, wasn't playing, just holding it like it might disappear at any moment. Rook and Tally sat on either side of him, their usual energy completely absent, their markings barely visible in the dim unit lighting. 3 cubs who'd found joy in a simple rubber ball, now watching that joy get systematically dismantled by people who'd never even met them. Joanna stood there, watching 2 parents struggling with an impossible choice: their children's happiness or their children's future. "Give me a day," she said suddenly. "What?" "Give me 1 day. Don't make any decisions yet. Please." Dimara tilted her head. "Joanna, what are you—" "Just trust me. 1 day." She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and headed down the corridor at a jog, her mind already racing through possibilities, connections, favors she could call in. This was either going to be brilliant, or it was going to get her fired. Possibly both. Joanna spent the entire day working connections she didn't even know she had. She called in favors from her supervisor, who knew someone in station administration, who knew someone in the diplomatic corps, who had contacts on Dramath Prime. By 1800 hours, she had what she needed: a live communication link to the Apex Academy and permission to request a demonstration assessment. By 1830, she had confirmation. Evaluator Wen Nash, decorated warrior teacher of the Apex Academy, would arrive within 2 days to conduct a personal evaluation of the cubs. By 1900 hours, she was standing in front of Nalreth and Dimara's door, explaining her absolutely insane plan. "You did what?" Nalreth's markings flared bright with what might have been panic. "I requested a demonstration. The cubs get to show what they've learned. All of it. Traditional skills and new skills. If they pass, the rejection gets reviewed." "Joanna," Dimara said carefully, "Wen Nash is legendary. He has trained 3 generations of Dramathi warriors. He has never left Dramath Prime. He believes in the old ways completely. If the cubs fail his assessment, then they're no worse off than they are now," Joanna finished. "But what if they don't fail?" "They will fail," Nalreth said flatly. "They are cubs who spend their evenings playing with rubber balls and learning human games. Wen Nash will see exactly what the review board saw: soft cubs who have abandoned their heritage. Or," Joanna said, "he'll see cubs who've learned to adapt, to think creatively, to work with other species. Isn't that what diplomats need?" The parents were silent. From inside the unit, Pip's voice drifted out. "Father? Mother? Can we still play today?" The question was small, hopeful, heartbreaking. Nalreth looked at Joanna. What exactly did you have in mind? 2 days later, evaluator Wen Nash arrived. He was older than Nalreth, his fur graying at the edges, his movements carrying the weight of age and authority. His markings were steady, unwavering, the deep red of old blood. He walked through Corridor 12 like he owned it, and everyone instinctively moved aside. This was what apex predators looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. Joanna had prepared what she privately called the gauntlet. It started at one end of the residential sector and wound through corridors, maintenance shafts, common areas, and recreation decks. She'd gotten permission from station administration, help from neighbors, and about 6 hours of sleep total in 2 days. The course incorporated traditional dramatized skills: tracking, hunting, tactical coordination, environmental adaptation. But it also incorporated everything the Cubs had learned from playing: spatial awareness from wall ball, audio tracking from Tally's ventilation games, trajectory prediction from Rook's ricochet calculations, strategic misdirection from Pip's fake-outs. And it required cooperation with other species. When Nash stood at the starting point, his 4 eyes scanning the course markers, his expression unreadable. "This is your assessment?" His voice was deep, resonant, carrying harmonics that made Joanna's bones vibrate. "Yes, evaluator. It is unconventional. The Cubs have had unconventional training." When Nash turned to where Pip, Rook, and Tally stood with their parents. The Cubs' markings were cycling through colors rapidly, betraying their nervousness. "Show me what you have learned, young ones. Show me if you are still Dramathy." What happened next would have made an incredible action sequence. The Cubs moved through the course like they'd been born for it. They tracked scent markers Joanna had placed, their noses working in coordination. They navigated obstacle courses using techniques from both Dramathy hunting practices and the hallway games. They worked together, communicating in rapid chirps and marking flashes, their coordination flawless. But the real test came in the multi-species sections. Quellen joined them on the aerial portion, and the Cubs adapted instantly. Tally directed her to scout from above while Pip and Rook flanked below, creating a 3-dimensional hunting formation that no traditional Dramathy training would have taught them. Glimmer appeared in his mobility tank for the aquatic section, and Rook figured out how to use the tank's reflection to spot hidden targets, calling out positions while his siblings retrieved them. They solved puzzles that required both Dramathy physical prowess and creative thinking from human games. They demonstrated tracking skills that impressed even Wen Nash, but also showed strategic flexibility that traditional training actively discouraged. Joanna watched from the sidelines, her heart pounding. Nalreth and Damara stood beside her, their markings flickering so rapidly they looked like strobes. The Cubs reached the final section, a simulation of retrieving an objective while avoiding detection. They could have done it the traditional way, using pure stealth and speed. Instead, they did something no evaluator would have expected. They created a distraction using the balls, coordinating throws that bounced through the course in patterns that drew attention away from their real approach. Tally used audio cues to time their movements. Rook calculated angles that let them move through blind spots. Pip orchestrated the whole thing like a tiny general. They retrieved the objective in half the expected time. Silence fell over the observation area. Wen Nash stood motionless, his markings steady and unreadable. He watched the Cubs approach, 3 small predators who just demonstrated skills their species hadn't even known to teach. "Evaluator," Nalreth began, his voice tight. Wen Nash raised a manipulator limb, requesting silence. He studied the Cubs for a long moment, his four eyes moving from one to another. Then his markings shifted, brightened, pulsed in a pattern that Joanna didn't recognize, but that made both Nalreth and Dimara gasp. "These cubs," Wen Nash said slowly, "are not losing their edge." Pause. "They are evolving it."